most important decision for a project owner to make before they embark on a construction project is answering the question of who should hire the architect. Should the owner hire the architect directly, or should the owner allow the contractor to hire the architect directly? It's a real fork in the road with huge implications that would surprise most project owners. There's good reasons for an owner to hire an architect, and there's good reasons for an owner to allow the contractor to do so. It's really a question of, what's most important to the owner, and what risks are they willing to accept and what risks are they wanting to hedge against. Traditionally, the traditional method of project delivery is the owner is going to hire the contractor with one contract, and the owner is going to hire the architect with a separate contract. In this method of traditional project delivery, the owner can count on the architect, as long as this is part of the architect's scope of work, which, it's very common in owner-architect agreements, for the architect to be paid money by the owner in the construction phase after the design is complete, to kind of keep an eye on the contractor, to police the contractor for the benefit of the owner. And this can be a really important benefit for a project owner that's an occasional or perhaps unsophisticated consumer of design and construction services, because an architect that's walking around on the site is going to say, wait a minute here, there are corners being cut all over the place. I can see it. I can see that I designed the studs to be 12 inches on center. But the contractor is building a house with them 16 inches on center. This is not what I intended. It's not as high a quality construction. An architect is going to be able to walk around and say, hey, owner, you got an issue here, where most homeowners and most project owners are not going to be sophisticated enough to notice that themselves. The average homeowner or project owner is not going to be able to look at a payment request and say, wait a minute, contractor, you're not 34% complete with the project. There isn't a window out there. You're at best, 29% complete. So no, I'm not going to pay you as much this month as you're asking for. That's one of the real benefits of the owner hiring the architect separately, because the owner has the ability to charge the architect with providing what's known in the industry as construction administration, making site observations each month, helping the owner review the payment request from the contractor, being out on site to answer requests for information from the contractor, reviewing and blessing requests for substitutions that the contractor might be making. There's a huge benefit to this traditional method of project delivery, where the owner is going to hire the architect separately in an owner-architect agreement. It's really the only way of ensuring that the architect's loyalty, is to the owner, is to sort of establish it contractually. But there are cons as well, right? I mean, what's the con of separately hiring the architect from the contractor, and as opposed to allowing the contractor to bring their own architect to the project and to hire the architect, directly under a contract between the contractor and the architect. One of the cons of having the owner bring their own architect to the table is it kind of puts the architect and the contractor in an intentionally adversarial relationship, right? The general contractor is not going to necessarily like having an architect look over their shoulder and say, no, you're not doing it right. You have to build it a different way, or you're cutting a corner, or no, Mr. Contractor, your payment request is overstated and the owner should cut it down, or no, contractor, you shouldn't be allowed to make that substitution because it's not the same level of quality that the owner's expecting. When an owner hires an architect separately under an owner-architect agreement and brings that architect to the project, so that the architect can do a good design but then do this construction administration, what the owner is doing is putting the architect into an intentional adversarial relationship with the general contractor, but it's intentional, it's for the owner's benefit. And so there are pros and there are cons. Does this tend to offer the owner a layer of protection? that they might otherwise sorely be missing? Absolutely. It tend to lead to a little bit more finger pointing between the architect and the contractor? Absolutely. Like, can it be something that could spark claims and adversarialism on the project? Yeah, I mean, sometimes that's true. But personally, if I was going to build my own, custom luxury home, I personally would hire the architect directly in an owner-architect agreement, and I would pay the architect a lot of money to be on site during construction. I'm maybe overstating it a little bit to say that I'd want the architect to watch every nail being driven, but I think that I certainly would want something close to that, if it was my project. But there are a lot of other benefits that you can realize if you're a homeowner and you go down the other path. If at the fork in the road you say, no, I'm not going to hire the architect, I'm going to hire the contractor, and I'm going to let the contractor bring to the table the architect that they're used to working with, and I'm going to let the contractor enter into a contract with the architect. That method of project delivery, it's called design build. It essentially, is a situation where the owner is going to hire one party, the contractor, to be responsible for delivering both the design and construction. There's a whole bunch of benefits to the design build method of project delivery. And I'm a big fan of the design build method of project delivery. I don't want to suggest otherwise. With my comments a second ago when I was saying what I would do if I was going to build my own luxury home, I don't mean to suggest that I'm not always using the design build method of project delivery, because there is certain upsides. I mean, one obvious one is that the owner, if it only's got one contract with one party that's responsible for both design and construction, there isn't this finger pointing. You're not going to have the architect say the contractor did it and the contractor say the architect did it, because as the owner, you have a contract only with one party that is responsible for everything good and everything bad, whether it's design or construction. And so, I like to call this design build method of project delivery, where the owner only hires the contractor and then the contractor separately hires the architect. I call it the, one throat to choke method of project delivery, because you're not going to have the architect and the contractor saying it's not me, it's the other one's fault. Whether it's a design defect or a construction defect, if the owner's hired the contractor and allowed the contractor to separately subcontract with the architect, doesn't matter if it's a mistake the architect made or whether it's a mistake the contractor made. The contractor is going to be contractually responsible to the owner, in this design build method of project delivery. Design build is good for a lot of other reasons too. It allows the owner to get started with construction more quickly than would be possible if the owner was going to separately hire the architect in one contract and the contractor in another contract, because when you've got one party that's responsible for both design and construction, the foundation can be dug. When the foundation is designed, then that might be well before the rest of the house, is completed. And so when you've got one party that's responsible for both, there are ways that you can fast track the project that are much more difficult to accomplish if the owner is going to separately hire the architect in its own contract. Because in that more traditional method of project delivery, what typically happens is the design is 100% complete, and then there's a bidding process, right? The contractors will come and they'll bid, what they're going to offer to build the project for. It's a more of a sequential method of project delivery where the owner hires the architect separately, because the design is almost always complete first, and then the contractors show up and they begin to do their pricing. So, if you're an owner that's looking to fast track the project, there's a lot to be said about the design build method of project delivery, because it tends to take longer to complete a project if you're the owner, and you're going to separately hire the architect and allow them to complete the design and then put it out to bid. But in this never-ending trade-off of pros and cons, an owner that is really cost sensitive or is really concerned about quality is probably going to be better served to say, forget about speed, let's get the design nailed down entirely, and then let's have it priced by contractors. So there's less, debate about, what the design intent is, and, it's all wrapped up in one set of issue for construction plans and specifications. Every line is drawn, and a contractor can say, I understand exactly what I need to do, and I know exactly what my price is going to be. In this traditional method of project delivery, where the owner is going to hire the architect separately in one contract and the contractor in another, that's good for high quality design and construction. That's good for having a better ability to control what the final price is going to be, but it takes longer. So there's this push and this pull. There's pros and there's cons. The traditional method of project delivery, which is sometimes known as design bid build or design negotiate build, it's got its pros and cons. The design build method of project delivery, by contrast, where the owner is going to hire only one party, generally the contractor, and then allow the contractor to subcontract out the design work, it has its pros and its cons as well. But all things being equal, if you are a residential project owner and you're embarking on a project, one of the most important decisions that you can make is whether you should hire the architect yourself or whether you should allow the contractor to do so. And I, for one, if I was going to build a home, I think I would want the architect to be under contract with me, so as the homeowner, so it owes its duty of loyalty to me, so that somebody that knows more than the average homeowner about the state of completion of construction, and is it going at the level of quality and at the pace that is expected. I think I would want an architect in my pocket looking over the contractor's shoulders to make sure that my interests as a homeowner are being looked out for. So, if you're about to embark on a project, more than anything else, particularly if you're a homeowner, somebody that only occasionally builds and constructs, most important thing that you can figure out is whether it's in your best interest to hire the architect yourself, or whether you're willing to make the trade-offs to allow the contractor to hire the architect under a separate contract.